Yay! We have another 6H V2 update! Last time I talked about the sweat test and how it influences the choices also of the case material and the finish on the case. Well, today behind me is that first hint, what we've chosen to do. And it is the most expensive way of doing it, but it's really, really cool. And today I'm going to show you what that is and what it means. But let's do that outside because this is not really great with the noise. All right, so I do need to provide a little bit more context before we go into the whole process. And it starts off with the previous update where I was talking about the sweat test. And the sweat test was very important to us because it kind of showed a new aspect of how we do metal cases and how we can make them more durable. So what we saw in the 8HE zinc black case is that we had an e-coating over it, and some users with a certain pH value in their sweat would have some kind of bubbling issue, and that would not make a very durable case. But that kind of made us concerned with 6H V2. We can't and don't want that same issue, so we have the sweat test. With the sweat test, we tested the 6H V2 with a bunch of different coatings, but also a bunch of different making processes of the case to see how durable is it against sweat. That test didn't come out too well for the process that we were aiming for, which was also die casting, but this time not with zinc, but with aluminum. That would also be e-coated, and another one would be e-coated and painted, but it just didn't come out the test the way we wanted. And we were very, very doubtful that we could get it to the level that we wanted for the 6H V2 with the limited time that we had, because we only had the time left to do that test one more time. So we decided, let's just go for the safest option available to us, which is a production process that is also the most expensive way of making the case. Now that process is basically doing aluminum extrusion and then CNCing it and anodizing it. It is not a completely new process in this world, but it is a more expensive process because CNC time is expensive. But the great thing is when we put it through this process and we did the sweat test and we did the chemical tests, it even performed better than all the other competitor cases that we put through the same tests to have a relative comparison, to see where should we put that requirement that we are satisfied with the quality of the product. Now, let's get into what that process is. And it starts all in this factory, which is the extrusion factory. The extrusion factory has one job, and that's transferring the raw material into a shape of metal that makes it faster and easier for the CNC machine to cut through and get the final product. By taking this little step, we can save time on the CNC machine. It basically takes a big cylinder of raw aluminum material, puts that in an oven where it slowly heats up all the way to somewhere in the 400, 500 degrees. The raw material cylinder comes out of the oven, preheated basically, making it more malleable and softer, but not so soft that it melts in front of your eyes. It rolls down into the extrusion machine, which loads it up and then pushes with a huge piston that piece of raw material through a specifically 6H V2 shaped stencil, and as if it's clay, pushing that through that hole, which looks a little bit like the 6H V2 case, and it keeps pushing, pushing, pushing until it has a really, really, really long piece of that shape, after which it cuts it, moves it aside, and continues pushing the next really, 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 really long slab. Now, obviously, that slab is so long that it's not completely straight anymore, but also not usable yet. So then in the next machine, it will grab it on one side and it will grab it on the other side and start stretching it out to straighten out the whole slab. So then it can go into the next step, and that is cutting it to a slightly smaller piece so it's easier to fit into the oven. So when it's all stacked together onto a tray, it's brought to the oven, and in the oven it sits for 6 hours to harden the material. And it's a very important step also to harden the material because it will slightly shrink the material before, when it's taken out, it gets cut into the specific size for the 6H V2. And when it's cut into that specific size, it's all stacked together on the pallet, and that is what goes to the next factory, which is a CNC factory where they can do all the final finishes. That is the next factory that we're going to right now.
These are all the CNC machines that are making your 618 V2 case. And just coming from that extrusion process, we had that big block of metal. Now here it gets cut out into that case shape. It's really noisy here, so let's do the explanation outside. All right, that's a lot better. Now let's take a look. What is CNC machining? This is basically having a drill inside the machine that's cutting out pieces of metal around, inside, on the sides to create a shape that you want from the block of metal. So we've seen from the extrusion that that block of metal was already pre-shaped into that case, but it's still a whole block. And in this process is where we cut away all that metal and actually create that V2 case shape. And it happens in 5 steps. The first step is that we create 2 holes on the top, because that will help with the second step, which is the whole back side of the case. After it's done the back side, it can go to the next step, which step 3, the whole top side. But the top side is actually the longest process because it needs to remove the most material. You have to imagine it has to remove all the aluminum material on the inside of the case. But once that is completed, it goes to step 4. And in step 4, we have the sides of the case. That's where we have that strap attachment, or you can make it smooth. It creates the whole opening and that slight shape that we have for the side. And then the final step, step 5, it goes back to the back side where it smoothens out the surface a bit more, because on the back side you also have that angle and it has like little steps cuts to create that angle, and it smooths that out so you have a nicer feeling case. Once that is all completed, it goes to the final part, which is a QC part and preparation for the next factory, which is anodization. But let's go take a look at the QC first. And here we are at the QC location. This is the final step before it goes to the anodization factory. And it starts off with a random check for dimension. So you have this little machine here doing a height difference dimension check. He'll just take random cases from batches and do a double check to see if it's all following the dimensions according to specifications. Then for every case, they'll do a check on the strap attachment to make sure it's not only fitting into the holes, but that it's also perfectly aligned with the case. And then there's a visual inspection as the last one before it goes into the box. And the visual inspection, it double checks if there's any damage on the surface, because when you go for these different steps, maybe along the way it got damaged, and she can do a final check to make sure it's all okay before it goes to anodization. There is one more machine that is also used for random checking. It's a 2.5D machine. It does a top-down view, checking all the specifications, and it can do that much faster, and also does it randomly for the batches. Let's go take a look at the anodization factory. We have to drive, so it's not here. See you there. You hear that noise? That is the sandblasting behind me, and that's the first process for anodization. This is the anodizing factory. So after our CNC process, where we now have the aluminum shaped into our keyboard case, we need to make the final finish and color of the case. Now this is an important step because this also makes sure that your case is going to last a long time, and it's going to protect it against corrosion, these chemicals, spills, you remember Coca-Cola, lotions, you name it, so that they don't further corrode that case and they don't blemish that case after one spill, etc. The anodization process starts with sandblasting, and that's a big machine we just passed by, which has 16 jets blasting sand against the case top side, and afterwards again on the bottom side, and that's to prepare it for anodization steps, but also to give it a certain look and feel. Now, before it goes into the actual anodization bath itself, it needs to be prepared, and that preparation is an alkaline bath, a pH neutralization bath, and a little acid bath, after which it gets washed every time. And that helps with the shine, it helps with the feel, and then it goes into the anodization bath, which is the longest bath, for 30 minutes, and that will create that hardened, oxidized layer and imbue the color to the surface of the alumina. And that will stay there for a long time. And then you have your perfect, beautiful 60HE V2 case. But of course, we also need to double check if that case is actually following the specification we had set for the bright silver and for the black anodized. And we do that with a check of 3 different things. We look at the roughness of the surface, reflection of the surface, and of course the color of the surface. We have special machines to do exactly that, and that is done after the anodization on this assembly line where it is prepared to go to the assembly factory. And this is a very, very small line because they just do a QC check. And that check doesn't only take place in this factory here, it also takes place before it goes out of this factory and when it comes in at the assembly factory. And this way we can make sure that we don't only verify if all the colors and specifications are correct at the factory itself, but also at a third-party factory to make sure that they are following the specifications we had set. And that is everything for anodization, if I'm right. And that was it. That's how your 60HE V2 case is going to be made. We'll have more details when we get closer to that campaign launch. We'll show you the dates and delivery times. Right now, we're just really, really focused on making sure that everything can go smoothly for production. And once that is happening, with some more clear dates, we'll do announcements, and you can finally get your 60HE V2. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.